Hello, and welcome to the NEWSPASTE Podcast with me, your host, Johnny Bedwell. I am here today with Fox Green, and it's a real interesting, it's going to be a real interesting show. Anybody who knows my work and knows what I do knows that I love these subjects that we're going to talk about today, that they've interested me the most. And let's go through a little bit because Fox Green, you can find him at spacecommune.com, which is subtitled Energy and Geopolitics and describes itself as a, quote, seeking an alternative to the degrowth and deindustrialization paradigm being thrust upon us through the Great Reset agenda. And I watched one of his lectures recently, most of it. I could still got to watch a little bit at the end. The Truth About Environmentalism in China and the Pagan Origins of Ecology. It's a brilliant place to start indulging in Fox Green's research, which is well presented, well produced, and well worth everybody's time. And we're going to speak as well today about his up-and-coming documentary that covers it's a 5-part documentary that'll dive into the history of how RFK Jr. and Vandana Shiva have been dispatched by oligarchs to places like Cuba and Sri Lanka to destabilize their economies and attack their sovereignty with their political clout. And oh my God, do they have some political clout. Fox Green, did I miss anything at all? Any place where people can find you? Is there a place which is more convenient for you?
No, that's a perfect intro. Yeah, spacecommune.com is the best place to find all of our content. We have a podcast it's kind of been on hold, but we have a nice backlog. You can find that on all podcasting services, Spotify, whatever. We have a YouTube channel with documentaries. So yeah, but just go to spacecommune.com and you can find all
So
that stuff.
spacecommune.com was what is that like? What do you see that as a base for? Because it seems like a really interesting name. And I was trying to work out where you would come into the idea of having that name.
Yeah, it is an interesting name, isn't it? Sometimes I think it sounds a little too leftist sound seeming, and we're trying to appeal to all people across the spectrum. We don't like that left-right dichotomy, but I think it's a nice, it's grown on me over the years because I think it has a nice meaning to it, a nice multiple meaning of commune, right? To commune with people is to experience, to chat, to exchange ideas, and then creating like a space to do so, right? And space exploration, the future. We're very technology oriented, future oriented. So yeah, it's a name that popped into my head in 2018. So gosh, like 6 years ago. And it's been our channel ever since.
Yeah, that's a strange mixture there. That's a strange mixture to have within like independent news communities. Usually everybody's a technophobe. And everybody says they got to build a very small communities away from places with away. And it is very like I described to someone recently like zeros and ones. Where if you keep giving off zeros every time you get ones, you're given a negative response, so you never get something come from it. And I don't necessarily hate technology because it brings us all of this ability to communicate and commune in a different way.
Mm.
But it's very anti-independent media, I would think. Have you had any criticism like that?
I haven't actually. Yeah, I think I do see your point though, as far as a lot of people who are critical of mainstream media are also happen to be hesitant to embrace technology. They see the machine as the big bad, right? And we are very alternative to that alternative, right? And I think it's rooted in the fact that we are very pro humanity, and we see technology as something that needs to be leveraged for the good of humankind. We created
Mhm.
technology. That's why we're different than animals. Is humans can create technology that harnesses the power of the universe to make the world better. We certainly can do terrible things with it as well. But the trajectory of human civilization and human society has been towards the good, and our lives are so much better because of technology, that we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We have to keep embracing technology if we want to create a society where more people are happy, fed, prosperous. Wealth is a good thing, right? And the only way to create more wealth is to get together and use technology in a way that's rational, humanitarian, um, all these good things. I think the oligarchs want us to think that technology is just the evil, right? It's just evil. We need to go back to nature, back to land, live like animals off the land, not overpopulate the world. But technology lets us create more human beings, and that's a good thing. So
Yeah, you sold it to me. Let's go to space all together in one room.
that's right.
I do. I mean, I'm personally, I'm not criticizing. I love the idea of space commune. It sounds brilliant because I'm a massive fan of the idea of being around people. Being alone is a horrible place. And that we are probably going to end up going to space. I love the idea of it. How far we've been and what the true story is right now, I do not
Absolutely.
know. But I think it's also kind of irrelevant. It's something that it's a symptom of the time. We're in that bridge in between creating the technologies that's going to go there, and we can't stop people creating technologies. There's no way to do it. So you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, but it's too late to put the turn the tap off, you know.
Yeah, to put the
So
genie back in the bottle, right?
yeah.
Well, and you think about also we have international space stations, right? So this is something that's going to bring the international world into the next era of humankind is international cooperation to get into space, and to get more resources to explore, to discover new things about the universe. I mean, throughout the Cold War, this is the one thing that brought together the United States and Russia, right? Is space.
Mhm.
It's the
I
new
love that.
frontier.
Yeah, in your lecture that was it was just the other day, yeah. Um
Yep.
it- that was really I liked how you have a positive spin on the idea of humans going towards a project like going into space, and how the endeavor of doing it in unity is something that was extremely beautiful. I think you also see through a lot of the bad guy Russia sort of rhetoric, obviously, because there's a real history there, and you talk about oligarchs. I've heard, that's something that's obviously, I mean, it's key to what we do and what we study and what we look into, because we're looking at these people, aren't we? We're looking at the people who maybe the functionaries, the people who do the stuff out in the public on behalf of these. Yet there's I'm sure the true power and the true hidden hand is up there. What do you see the modern oligarchy as? How can you define it in, say, maybe it's easier to define it within Russian society than it is within European or Western society, but where do you think that power is?
Well, I think it's supranational. It lives above the nation state, right? It's this thing, the one world government, right? This world communism kind of thing, where the Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, these people who think that they can live above the national sovereignty of you know independent nations and say we're a one world government and we're going to micromanage all these ways that human beings have self-organized in a way that makes sense for them and their communities. We know better than them. I think that's how it manifests today, and people have a very visceral reaction, rightly, to things like the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, Harari, all these freaks, who
Mm-hmm.
who who try to sound like, oh, we're doing it for your own good, stakeholder capitalism, where we want a better world, but people can see right through this stuff.
Yeah,
People have
I,
like a sense about it.
yeah, I definitely think that as soon as you touch on those buttons of the World Economic Forum, of Klaus Schwab, of Yuval Noah Harari, people are able, who have listened to them or understand the basics of it, can see that there is something nefarious within their language, because it always comes off as so passive and so caring. But in actual fact, they're always speaking in two ways. They're speaking to the oligarchs, they're speaking to the people above, and they're speaking to the people below at the same time. I found that very strange. I examined 2019 and 2020 Yuval Noah Harari speeches at the World Economic Forum, and like, he's talking in so carefully worded. These guys, I mean, I'm impressed by how expert they are at wielding the language. And I
He's
think,
very sophisticated.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's quite amazing. So, when did you get into this? I'm just getting to where have you been all my life should be the question. But no, when did you start getting into this? What was the straw that broke the camel's back, or the
That's
multiple straws?
a good question. I mean, I'm really just a regular person who just started asking questions,
Hmm.
and it started in my backyard. I'm a business person, locally minded person, very into, I criticize a lot the localism movements, but I was very much into that. I was very much into local economies are good and it strengthens your community, which I still believe. But there was something very rotten going on, and I was just sort of searching out what was going on, and it led me to discover that in my hometown here in the Hudson Valley of New York, there's a lot of NGO interests that are connected to Warren Buffett and George Soros, specifically the son of Warren Buffett, Peter Buffett, who's kind of a hippie leftist kind of guy, has been infusing this our neck of the woods with a ton of cash. And we've been seeing, even though our real economy, like industry and our economy is going to shit, but somehow all this money is getting invested into all these NGOs that are very sort of leftists, alternative thinking. What the hell is going on? So
It's the
we discovered
60s. It's the 60s all over again.
it is, and he is a baby boomer himself. He's of that age, so he's bringing this sort of idealized world, and he's trying to create. And you can actually look this up. An author on oh, what's the name of the magazine? Um, Tablet, thank you. On Tablet magazine, there was an article written about Peter Buffett and what he's doing here in Kingston, New York. It's called "When a Buffett Buys Your Town," something like that. But he's basically running an experiment here. So that kind of led me to say, well, what the heck is going on? And then that led me to sort of, why is he doing this? And then seeing his connections into all these international organizations that are kind of have this agenda and this larger agenda of degrowth, the idea of stopping industry, stopping nations from becoming wealthy off of their own resources, because it hurts the earth. According to them, that's kind of their religious underpinning, or pseudo-religious, pseudo-scientific underpinning, is that they think that we're hurting the earth and humans are going to destroy the planet. It's kind of like Paul Ehrlich, the population bomb. They believe this stuff. The baby boomers were incepted with all kinds of narratives about, it was a scary time, I guess, for them, because the human population was exploding. And they said, oh no, what's going to happen with all these human beings? We're overcrowding, and there was a big neo-Malthusian scare in that time. So it really it creeps into every area, and then you start to think of the geopolitical implications of this, and why they're opposed to Russia and China, because these are large, powerful nations. They're not tiny little nations that can be taken over like Ukraine or whatever. These are large, powerful civilizational nations that are saying, you know what? We're not going to adhere to your rules-based order and the unipolar world order. And it's an existential threat to the people who believe that we need to all kind of revert to a more feudal era where everyone is kind of just living off the land, laboring intensively, lowering their carbon footprint, supposedly, and less people are living longer lives because of modern medicine and agriculture. So
I think the problem is you can never have a Malthusian who can write defense policy, because if they both believe in that, then eventually there's only one option, isn't there?
Yeah.
Because I mean, you're going to be attacked by all of the other countries as soon as you get down to a certain level of population, because you're easy prey. So you're going to have to just kill everybody. I mean, that's
Yeah.
really just becomes it. And I was wondering that when you were talking earlier, I was wondering whether, the like gaming out nuclear theory and mutually assured destruction, how long it took for those guys to realize that the philosophy lined up, or at least their philosophy of keeping everybody in fear, a state of fear all the time, needs to have an end game, a point to it, and that point is depopulation, and it marries up really well with all of this. So I mean, there's that time when you say it was scary, it was like terrifying. And the people who were working in high pressure situations of intelligence and defense, I've seen quotes from loads of different people through that era who were just like, one stands out as comes into my mind. I can't remember who it was, but it would come up in the Black Hand series that I wrote. They said they didn't know whether it was a Russian. He said he didn't know whether they were going to die tomorrow or the next day, or it could be straight away, right now. That's, you have to just live and do all of the craziest things you possibly can while you're around. And that sort of thing can only be deadened by bringing down the population or having everybody on the agenda of that. Now, when you start talking about this era, it's really, really intriguing, and it sounds like it's history repeating itself. Because for a lot of people who don't know the 50s and 60s and the intelligence operations, and they don't probably understand how that the modern rise of NGOs is basically, that was the precursor to this. So how do you see that within history? I mean, I don't know what. There's so many questions I could ask you. I don't know what question to ask you.
How do I see what throughout history?
Like intelligence, organized intelligence operations, from probably the 50s, and this sort of like how that's worked into the Malthusian world. I mean, where was the crossover? Where was the point
Mm.
where they realized they were working together?
Yeah, I mean, I think it like so much of it goes back to the late 19th century into the early 20th century. You get the world wars. And then I think after World War II, the paradigm really begins to shift. And this is when Russia all of a sudden becomes the enemy nation of the United States. Before that, they were always our allies. They helped us win the revolution. They helped us win the Civil War. Russia, and then we won, World War II as allies. Then all of a sudden they became our mortal enemies. And all this effort was put into subverting the opinion of regular Americans. And you talk about how scary it was for people then. We both were talking about, the population and the threat of nuclear war. And what happens to a population when they think there potentially is no future, that we're all going to die in a war, or we're going to become overpopulated and run out of resources, whatever doomsday scenario, they stop thinking about the future. And when you stop thinking about yourself as an agent of change that can act upon the future and make the future better, you lose a moral compass. You're like, okay, I'm just alive for a little while. I might as well make the most of it. We're all going to die anyways. So you get this cultural nihilism that I think you first really start to see in the boomer generation, because they're the ones that started becoming of age after that period of time when you get the Congress for Cultural Freedom projects from the CIA to instill a cultural nihilism into people, into fear, just making people scared of the future, scared of reality, and wanting to kind of just escape into drug culture, into feeling good, free love, rock and roll, and really kind of a
Adina,
new.
I'd be like,
Yeah, no, me too. Like I grew up with a boomer, parent, and it wore off on me, and I liked all kinds of rock and roll, like the Beatles, and you know, um, Robert Crumb, kind of a nihilist cartoonist.
hmm
Um, and that era, there's some good stuff. There's some fun stuff that comes out. I don't want to be poo-pooing all of it, but we have to understand the historical context of the nihilism it was set on creating, and we have to create sort of a new culture in the West that is future oriented, that respects the past and is future oriented and is not this nihilistic um, culture that says, well, we're just here for a little while. We might as well have as many orgasms as we can before we die, kind of
But
thing.
that nihilistic personality disorder that has taken over society is now in charge of the future tech. It seems that
Yeah,
that's where we are. So
absolutely.
I mean, it's hard to not fear what the future looks like if it's going to be molded by madmen. So I think that was and of course then there's the level of propaganda that we've all taken in by the everything I believe about the future and I believe about the people who are building the tech at the moment is partly like some of it's from research, but some of it's just put upon me and research show by society and by media and by brainwashing, by operations.
Yeah.
Most of the media, I think, is just an operation. Of course, is even when they get down to the independent media. It's why I'm not so surprised. Maybe that no one ever like in the independent media. No one ever kind of criticizes each other because it's such a small community. Everybody's got to stay safe. So um, right. So we are entering into a future, and there's a growth of NGOs. And you are making, or have made a movie, or are making a movie, a documentary series or movie. How's it going to go, and what's it about?
So usually when I make documentaries, I just make one long documentary and put it out, but I'm doing it a little different this time. I'm gonna do it in parts, and it's based on an essay. If you want a preview of what it's going to be all about, I did write this as an essay form. Um, it's called Maintaining Empire, Cuba, Sri Lanka, yada yada. You'll see it. It looks just like the cover of the trailer. It's about Vandana Shiva, RFK, and King Charles. It sort of centers around them. Um, so the way I'm planning on doing this is releasing it in the same format, right? Is sort of setting the stage, diving into the Cuba situation, diving into the Sri Lanka situation, then focusing in on both RFK and Vandana Shiva, their relationship, King Charles, and just tying it all together at the end.
Was was it Cuba where RFK and some others were jailed at one point? Was
I
that
don't think he
Cuba?
was jailed there that I know of, but
They
he
they
went.
they were one of them, yeah, one of them. They were put in
Oh,
he was
really?
writing, yeah, he was writing letters home to his wife pretending that he loved her. Sorry, it's a terrible thing to say, but that was the period while he was also writing. I think that was 2001, 2002. I mean, I've been doing some deep research into Kennedy, and a group of them, someone, it was one of the big civil rights leaders was with them, and they were doing some sort of protest, and they got locked up. I think it's Cuba, and they got locked up, and they spent a couple of weeks or a week in prison. And he was writing back home, and this was the same time where in his diaries, RFK Jr.'s diaries, he was writing about the 37 women he had cheated on his wife with, and rating
Yeah.
them by standard of lays, which is something. Come on. When we were younger, maybe, but still, I think yeah. There's a lot to take in there. What can you tell us about the documentary in your research? What can you tell us that not giving away too much?
Well, just to touch on what you said, he's an interesting guy because the minute you start digging into him, you're like, what the heck? The more you dig, the more dirt is there. The guy is just filthy, filthy. It's crazy that he can run for president with such a dirty history. It's like
Yeah, and
you'd
looks
think
so
that'd be a
clean. He looks so
yeah.
clean.
Well, you'd
Uh,
think that would be a vulnerability, and you'd think all this alternative media that's celebrating him would look into this stuff, but it is bizarre, right? It's a bizarre contradiction. But
mhm.
what I focus on with Kennedy is really like the philosophy that's guiding him, because I think that's the most important, and what he's actually done. Um, and the biggest thing, so before he ran for president, he was on my radar because one of his largest life accomplishments was shutting down the Indian Point nuclear power plant here in New York State, which was kind of a disaster. It's kind of something that's not as well talked about as it should be, because I mean, so for many reasons, right? The environmental movement says they want to reduce emissions. Well, nuclear energy is emissionless fuel. So why would you shut down your largest portion of emission-free energy? So that's the major flaw. It also made the price of oil and gas go up because now we're more reliant on it. Um, it's just it was like, why did they do this? Because over these dumb arguments about killing the fish in the Hudson River, which aren't even, they've already gone out of their way to prevent that from happening. They're talking about tritium being released in the water, all these pseudoscientific explanations for shutting down this nuclear power plant, which was providing New York City with a quarter of its energy, clean, cheap, efficient, safe energy. I mean, RFK made a whole documentary that was fear mongering right after 9/11. He and his sister made a documentary about how the terrorists could have flown a plane into the nuclear power plant, which has been completely debunked. That can't happen. If it did happen, it would have nothing would have happened. But they leverage the fear. This is the common theme with RFK is he leverages people's fears uh,
Yeah, yeah.
in order to get his message out, whether it's for something he genuinely cares about or whether it's his handlers who are telling him to do this and he's just a middleman, who knows, right? But his major problem is that I mean, he's effectively impeded nuclear energy development in the United States. So when he popped up and I'm very pro nuclear energy. I live here in New York State. So when he up as a candidate, I said, wait a minute, you guys, let's look at this guy's history. But nobody seems to want to look at the history of RFK, his seedy history, let alone what he's actually done. Could you imagine if we had a president who actually wanted to actively shut down energy infrastructure? I mean, I think that that's incredibly dangerous.
Yeah. I find it really interesting that over my lifetime, I've constantly had pro Kennedy uh, propaganda pushed in my face, and I never saw it as propaganda. I welcomed it in because I was like, oh, this hero family, and I gave them sort of a hero arc, and everybody talks about them in such, you always feel sorry, always feel like society owes the Kennedys something, and etc. And I think that sort of currency is something that he's really been able to wield. That sort of, and it's a deep emotional, psychological currency that's created by the very people who killed and conspired to kill his father and his uncle. It's such a strange. He's such a strange man. He's such a strange mix. And when you were talking about, there was someone. I think his last name might be Hudson. Oh, God. Okay. Well, I'll get back to this when we um. But anyway, yeah. So RFK Jr. Uh, is what do you think do you think he can actually be president, or do you think he'll be president in 4 years time or 8 years time or something like that? Do you think that he's done enough? Because just before probably about 4 months, 5 months before he did the whole, made the whole Zionist sort of like pro-Zionist comments, and everybody went against him all of a sudden, or a large portion of the independent media just suddenly went, "Oh, he's a really nasty guy now. He was a hero last week, but now he's a really nasty guy," and they all switched all of a sudden for a little bit, and they'll go back again afterwards. I ran a poll on Twitter, and I asked people which one of these didn't appear in Jeffrey Epstein's Little Black Book, and I put Donald Trump, RFK Jr., Joe Biden, and Henry Kissinger. And I did it on purpose because I wanted to see if what I thought was true, which is everybody would pick RFK Jr. when he's actually the person who is most definitely was hanging around in Epstein's house and everything, and people's vision of him is obviously malleable. Is that something that's a CIA operation, or an operation, a deep state operation? That does that mean that he's been molded, crafted by the deep state? Do you think he's deep state?
It's hard to believe he's not. It's really hard to believe he's not. I don't know. Like, I can't say like, oh, I know this for sure. But if we just analyze how he's operating, and how, like you said, things that are just surface level that people should, could dig down just for a minute and be able to see right through. They're already trained. And this is the power of branding and marketing, right? Is that once you get that impression of somebody, you say, he's a good guy, I've decided, you will start to make all kinds of justifications when you hear, oh, he did, yeah, but he did this, 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 and this. Okay, well, I've already decided he's a good guy, so I'm going to, just like if your own father, like who you love, did something wrong, you'd say, well, he's still my father and I love him because I can understand why he did all these things, right? It's sort of this parasocial relationship that people form with these personalities like RFK, when he's rolled out in a way that is okay, yeah, he's branded as the truth teller, right? His podcasts were called like the Truth News or something. It's like the truth this, truth that. He's very honed in on his branding. Well, and you
Yeah.
talk about CIA, but what about isn't his daughter-in-law CIA, or supposedly ex-CIA, who's running his campaign? So I
No
mean,
one's ex-CIA.
there's
No one's
really,
ex-CIA. That just can't be. Yeah. and
yeah.
and
So
his son's over in
yeah,
Ukraine running ops
right,
as well, and
right,
his many other obvious links to intelligence. I personally, I hold probably a semi-unpopular for Epstein researchers, a semi-unpopular view that Epstein was a CIA interlocutor for other intelligence agencies and other things. And most of the people who were on his plane, the reason why everybody's focusing in on the girls, because most of the people who were on his plane were CIA, or were working for other intelligence agencies elsewhere, or were working for big banks for the intelligence agencies, etc.,
yeah,
and funding operations, etc. And if you look at then, and media operations of two people like Ron Burkle, who was on the African Odyssey, Epstein's African voyages with Bill Clinton, big went to try and purchase, I think it was it wasn't Washington Post, it was the other one, Washington, well, one of the Washington papers and one of the LA papers, got refused by the legal apparatus, and instead went and just suddenly purchased some Chinese newspapers instead. And that seemed to be what the operation probably would be get installed and look like you're actually, opposed to the government in some way, in a foreign government, and then run the operation there, and you're just a media organization that's working in an
God.
enemy.
Yeah, they run all kinds of tricks to mess with your mind and have you look, oh, are they doing this? This is double blind? Is this do they want me to think this thing, and this is the controlled operation, and this is the limited hangout, things like that. And I will say, in my experience, the most effective CIA instruments are people who don't even know they're being controlled
Mm,
as
I like
puppets
that.
by the
Yeah, yeah.
CIA. The people who are like, yeah, I'm CIA. at least they'll just say it, if they have direct connections. It's the people who think that they're acting on their own volition when they're really being controlled on behalf of the CIA. Those are the most potent people because they can say with all honesty, no, I'm not a CIA agent. I know I have nothing to do with that. But they don't even realize that they're being controlled by these
Yeah,
entities.
that they're funded by a few NGOs here, a few organizations here, and you follow up the chain of command, and you get to USAID and the rest of the cutouts that are there.
Yep.
I did a research on something called article called "The Non-Governmental Octopus," which looked at kind of the rise of NGOs in Ukraine, but in Eastern Europe in general, how in 1989 it was like about 50 to 100 NGOs in each of the countries scattered around. As soon as the Soviet the fall of Soviet Russia, suddenly they implanted like 50 to 100 every time they have revolution. So when Czechoslovakia became had a revolution and then became Czech Republic and Slovakia, the NGOs that were placed there then went on to other countries. And then the next wave had 150 NGOs in each of the countries. And by the time it got to Ukraine in 2004, there were, this is by the German Marshall Fund figures, so their own kind of figures, the figures of the people who are working with people like the Alliance for Security and Democracy, 30,000 NGOs in Ukraine alone to cause the instability that would turn Ukrainians from what were essentially, to most people who lived in the regions, they considered Russians their cousins back before, in the 90s and before. There was obvious strife in the past, and they've obviously had history, but most Ukrainians and most Russians I spoke to, who aren't captured by this sort of non-governmental octopus, will accept that basically the same people live next door to each other for years and years, and then got turned upon each other in a way that was visceral, and it's led to what, a Kissinger style perpetual limited warfare that aligns with the exact ideals of the CIA. So if Robert F. Kennedy, whatever he's pushing, it seems to be leading towards that. Now, what do you know about him then, about Vandana Shiva and Robert F. Kennedy and their use of NGOs to cause instability? Because that's what what documentary's about.
Yeah, when you say tentacles, that's the perfect, or octopus, that's the perfect way to describe it. And I was saying before about this supranational government, world government, and that's exactly how it operates. And that's why you see Russia and China kicking NGOs out of their country, because that's what their job is to divide and conquer neighbors, as you're saying, make the divide and conquer the neighbors, make them hurt each other, and then we can control them. But a lot of people don't talk about the fact that Kennedy actually runs an international NGO, or he founded this international NGO called Waterkeeper. What is Waterkeeper? And it springs out of this Riverkeeper organization, which started here in New York in the Hudson Valley. And now this Waterkeeper NGO is an international organization that basically is an environmentalist organization that stops development from happening, specifically in developing countries like, nations in Africa, in the third world, because they say, oh, it's going to pollute too much and we have to have appropriate technologies and we can't have too much energy, and it's going to hurt the fish or whatever. So, and his NGO, Waterkeeper, I looked into the numbers because this is what I do now is I look at 999 forms, or that they'll write about it on their own websites. They'll have their annual reports and you can see who's funding the organization. So at the top of his donor list for the past, I don't know, 10, 15 years, you have an organization called something in the Carolinas. But basically the guy behind it is a man named Fred Stanbeck. Fred Stanbeck is a old friend of Warren Buffett, and they share an interest in the fact that they think the world is overpopulated and have been overtly Malthusian in their proclivities to promote birth control, and push environmental organizations in order to, reduce the population things like that. So that's been his biggest funder in the $1 million plus category for a decade or more. So he's receiving tens of millions of dollars from an overtly Malthusian person to stop development in the developing world. And so that's what he transitioned to in his later years. As a younger man, he went directly to Cuba and told Fidel Castro, no, you can't develop a nuclear power plant. Even though after the fall of the Soviet Union, when Cuba's biggest trading partner went down the drain, they fell into a special period where people were basically starving. They were surviving on sugar water because they had no one to do business with. Their biggest commodity is producing sugar for the world. And when the Soviet Union fell, they had no one to sell all their sugar to. The US has had the longest running embargo on Cuba, which should be that's our people talk about Taiwan and China. That's like our Taiwan, right? They're
Yeah,
like
yeah,
our
yeah.
little island nation there, and we shouldn't be treating them, like enemies.
Yeah.
But that's how we've been treating them. And
You
so,
know, yeah.
they would have benefited from building up their nuclear energy, but they were not allowed to because the U.S., led by Kennedy and his whoever's handling him, said, no, you cannot develop. We cannot let that happen.
Do you know when that first started? That antagonism towards Cuba, how it was first really sparked was by a British officer, intelligence officer, one of the guys who created James Bond, in actual fact, alongside Ian Fleming. Um, oh God, don't his name, why is his name escaping me all of a sudden? I've written about him and everything. It's one of those moments, it'll come back to me. But anyway, he basically came up with this very interesting plan. He needed about between they had the British services, the BSE or something along those lines, that was based in New York and was an intelligence service throughout the war, and had been trying to manipulate American actions to be beneficial to what the British wanted to do on the continent. And this oh, yeah, so annoying that his name has escaped me. Um, he basically made a fake map of Cuba, and he wanted, just after the war, they wanted America to focus more away from Europe and this stuff and look more to their own areas. And so just coming out, I think it was just before the end of the war, they went through this plan. They took a Welshman, a dead Welshman. I'm a Welshman too. They took a dead Welshman from the war. They dressed him up as some sort of commanding officer or something. They put handcuffed a briefcase to him with some faked maps of Cuba, and it showed places where the Nazis wanted to build bases in Cuba with it, and then they crashed his plane into the water. So his body was found bloated by the Spanish, who then picked it up, took it to the Americans. The Americans to the American intelligence, and the Americans then went to Congress and passed the first anti-Cuba bill that was unthinkable before. They just didn't have an idea about focusing on Cuba, and then that kind of just led to a battle of being focused over there rather than where they wanted to. It was part of the games of the intelligence communities. The Americans and British were working against each other to get their own beneficial use of each other's forces, and that was a situation where it worked. So this is an old trick, of course, and Kennedy is just like a long line of, well, I suppose then you're saying he's a Malthusian, yeah?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I
So
mean, he doesn't come out and say he believes that the world is overpopulated, but certainly
yeah,
the crowd he runs with does say it. And the worship of the environment and Saint Francis Assisi, who is the saint, the patron saint of the environment, things like that. I've never actually caught him in 4K saying, I think the world is overpopulated, but I don't think
I,
it's too far from his thoughts.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, I did a lot of research. I've done a lot of research into him, so I seen how he poised himself very early on as an environmental lawyer, and all of these projects that have kind of made given him a very nice cover. Um, what explain to the audience, the newspaper audience, what you think of environmentalism?
Well, let me start off by saying that I get it. Like I love nature and I love animals,
Boo
lifelong.
animals, boo. No, I'm joking. I'm
I
joking.
saw your cat crawling in your lap.
she
I
she's
love
she's
pets.
there. She's all right.
Yeah, I mean, I love animals. I love the environment. I live in an area where I go hiking all the time. It's great. I love the environment. I don't think we should just pollute for the sake of polluting, but that's kind of the grift of the environmentalism is to incept into people an axiom that human beings are at odds with nature and that we can't live in symbiosis, or the only way that we can do so is to resist our urge to be human, what to do what makes us human beings and different than the animal kingdom, right? We are inherently different than the animal kingdom. We are able to do things with this physical material universe that animals cannot do. Animals cannot surpass their limits to growth. If they reach a certain level of population, they outstrip their resources, some of them die off, right? We don't abide by those rules. We can make creative discoveries that help us move past our supposed natural limits to growth. So environmentalism, when I talk about it, is and in a negative way. In general, why it was created and the basis of why it was created was to sort of incept this axiom that, which is the Malthusian axiom, that um, we are bounded within our limits, some supposed natural limits that the Earth has on us as a species, amongst all the other species. I'm sure you're familiar and your audience is familiar with the report, The Limits to Growth, that came out in the 1970s, which is the boilerplate for the World Economic Forum. This is this is basically some of the founding um, ideology behind the World Economic Forum is this limits to growth. And limits to growth was basically a couple of scientists who put some numbers into a rudimentary a computer that would be considered rudimentary
A
compared
Nazi computer, if you ask me. It was an
a co-
IBM project. It was
yeah,
a
yeah,
cheeky, very cheeky, and the World Economic. I mean, I went deep into the World Economic Forum and the Malthusian aspect of why it was brought to fruition, and some of the like sort of like breakups that had within the community that was joining to do the same thing. So Herman Kahn, the futurist, who you'll
yeah.
know, Hudson Institute, the Hudson comes up again. Crossover it crossed over with these guys for a little bit, and he had been really you know, he had been down with all of their thinking up until the point when, they launched it in 1971. Kahn and John Kenneth Galbraith, who was going to be mentored by John Maynard Keynes. I noticed you talk about someone else who's extremely important in that movement, who was also going to be mentored by who was mentored by John Maynard Keynes. John Kenneth Galbraith didn't end up getting mentored by him because he had a heart attack. Keynes had a heart attack, and or a stroke, just the year that he was going to go to Harvard, and instead he studied economy and Hitler or something along those lines. No, Nazi land policy. That's what he studied in Germany in 1938. But Herman Kahn and these guys suddenly split off when the limits to growth, some of them like turned when the limits to growth speech happened in like 1973, and Aurelio Peche and the whole we are the enemy of man is man itself, and etc. Like Herman Kahn came with a view that you sound like I think you at some points in your ideology you sound like you have like elements of 70s Kahn, where he basically said that in the future we'll be able to have the technology to go into space to mine asteroids and mine for minerals, so we're not affected by the limits to growth that they suggest exists. So that's an extremely, like, for people who are listening at home, if you want to study anything to understand what the agenda of when people say Malthusian, you want to look at the limits to growth speech from the World Economic Forum in January 1973. That's a good place to start. Why do you think this is so acceptable? Why do you who does it suit, this Malthusian ideal or ideology?
Nobody. At the end of the day, it doesn't suit anybody, even the people who push it. And that's the sad truth of it, is that these people are swept up in something that at the end of the day is not going to help them. And I think that's how we have to look at it, because I think when people say, "Oh, well, it's going to benefit them," okay, maybe short term they might make some money off of something or whatever, but people who are set on controlling the world, right? Have this agenda of wanting to constrict the world and maintain the little bit of power that they have, or a lot of power that they have. Their souls are just rotten to the core, and you have to feel bad for these people, because at the end of the day, they're miserable. These are miserable people, and they're doing.
You're describing robber barons of the past. You're describing,
Yeah.
that same sort of thing. The who feed off the people of the land and will take everything from them.
Yeah, I mean that's. I feel sorry. I feel sorry for these people. They're rejecting their own humanity, and most people aren't that way. Most people don't want to be that way, and then they insist on it because they're afraid of losing what they have. They think all they have is this one lifetime, and they need to like run up the score for themselves. And then when it's over, it's over. And they don't see themselves as part of the tapestry of human history and saying, well, I was alive for a little while and I did this and I contributed. They say, no, I got to run up the score while I'm here. Once it's over, once I don't exist, nothing exists. It's just nihilism. It's just nihilism. It doesn't suit them. And they're, I feel bad for RFK Jr. I genuinely feel bad for him. He seems like a very tormented soul.
I agree. I I've been doing, I mean, this, by the time that this comes out, I'm pretty positive that I will have released the other thing that I've been doing, which is I've been looking into the family history of Jordan B. Peterson. It's for a new program. It's called Who Do They Think They Are? And it goes through the genetics of the rich, powerful, and the influencers of the world, the ones who seem to be put on the big stage, and go back literally. I've gone back 1,000 direct ancestors, over 1,000 direct ancestors, so about 2,500 ancestors in general, but direct ones 1,000. Gone back to 170 AD, would you believe?
Wow.
Because unfortunately, it links up in two different ways to the Norman dynasty that would be married into the Viking families. So Rollo, who was one of the first dukes of Normandy, is related to him directly. So it means that basically he's also directly related to one of the Dukes of Normandy, who married a woman called Papia, I think her name is Papia Beaufort, and she was originally Svensson, and her great granddad was Ragnar Lodbrok, King Ragnar. So that means that's direct ancestors, and I feel that a lot of these people know their ancestry really well. And what I try and explain, or the reason why I'm doing this series, is for something we're speaking about here. And I think the malevolence within these like high up families that comes out is because of their feeling of lack of control. Now there's so many people on Earth and there's so many different heirs to their fortune. So they all know their family lineage. All of the people in the know and who care matter know their family lineage. We don't know their family lineage, so we don't see that. We don't see how that works. But my thought is, if that is true, if that's logically true, then I should be able to pick these people, go back through history, and discover that they're related to every single king and queen in England, from the Tudors and before, like Jordan B. Peterson is. He's directly related to King Henry VIII, to Edward the Second, Edward, all the Plantagenets by two different lines. And you can see that there's back then they had a lot more chance of getting into their point of power where they ran the show, and now they don't have that. So these rich families have had so many, like in the 1500s they were having 10 kids, and then they would have 10 kids, and then they would have 10 kids, and by the time it gets down to now, their lines are completely and utterly overpopulated. And maybe this is a projection of their own want to have their dynastical time back, and their limits are then they can be the robber barons of the past, but in the technological era with all of the benefits that that means. And even in the past, the technology was, if you've got a better sword, an army, and a load of pikes and armor, then your little village ain't going to do very well, and you're going to get put down if you quarrel. Yeah, that's something that when we talk here, that really, I think there might be that there's so many loose aristocrats now.
I think that theory makes a lot of sense. I think you're really onto something there. There's so much projection that happens, right? That lines up very, very neatly. And I think you're right. That's why they're obsessed with bloodlines and lineage and race and genetics and family trees and overpopulation. Now that lines up quite a bit. And that's something that from my own personal history, I can kind of attest to, that sensing that vibe from the very beginning, because I happened to grow up in a very weird place. I didn't grow up wealthy, but I grew up in an extremely wealthy and affluent area of the world. It was a suburb just outside of New York City, like 40 minutes outside of New York City in Connecticut. Ultra, ultra wealthy area. And I could just sense among those classmates, there's a code, and they're connected and they're watching each other's back, and they all end up in high places together. And you have to say, well, how can that be? If we live in a meritocratic society, isn't the chances of somebody else being good, shouldn't we be like equally distributed as across populations, as like the CEO of this company and the CEO of this company should come from all different places? If we're in a real meritocratic system, which we should be in the United States, which is the ideal that we were kind of founded on, but we have drifted away from because of this hereditary aristocracy that you mentioned, that still has such a deep control, deep roots here, control over our nation. And I think that's what our founding fathers were trying to get away from. But they didn't finish the job. You can't finish that job in one lifetime, in many lifetimes. And I think what we see from sort of, that dates back to like the British oligarchy, and even further back to Venetian. You get all these families, these bloodlines. And what we see is that I think that is the reason why we had this cultural infiltration in that part of the, sort of the after World War II that I was talking about, where they said, no, you can't be brothers with the Russians. You can't be brothers with the Chinese. You have to have no culture. We have to destroy all American culture, all Western culture, all goodness that comes out of Western culture, because people like to say Western culture is just evil inherently. And I don't think that's true. I think there's goodness that has come out of Western culture, and they want to strangle it. They want to say, you have no culture, you have no past, you have no future. Enjoy yourself, play some video games, do some drugs, sex, drugs, rock and roll, and then you die, and that's it. And that's how they keep us in a mental prison. People talk about materially limiting people's resources. Absolutely, that's a way to control people. But when you're in a first world country, when you're in a developed world, how else do they control you is through your mind. And that's way more powerful than if you, just like we were talking about the CIA, the CIA operatives who don't even know they're CIA operatives are the most potent ones. Well, when you don't even realize your mind is in a cage, you're in a prison of your own making that you don't they don't even have to keep you captive in it. You're willingly captive on your own. And that's why I think there's so much investment into this fake alternative media now is to keep people from escaping that mental prison. Because it
Mm.
seems like people want to get out. I think people want to get out of that mental prison. They see the desire for it because they see how their program is failing. And people in the West are saying, this sucks. I got to find a way out. And then they hop on the alternative media news networks, and those people say, okay, yeah, you're right, you're right, you're right. But stay in this cage, stay in this mental prison. You can't escape. There's no way out.
Most of the I hate to cause a war, but most of the hosts will like literally go gooey for the people who oppress them if they get to speak to them. And I can kind of understand, it's really often it's short take media is what we're presented with, so we don't get opportunities. I was on doing the Epstein files at the beginning of the year. I was in this big X space, massive, loads of people watching or listening, sorry. And there was Alex Jones in one of them and Rudy Giuliani, and I got to ask him some questions, but they weren't well with Giuliani it was definitely the exact question I wanted to ask him. But with Alex Jones, I mean, you can't even ask someone like that a question because you get gobbledygook. I found I had to ask him certain things that stopped him from and prevented him being able to talk gobbledygook. So, like the history of how the FBI, CIA, and the Justice Department are kind of intertwined and etc. And then you get some really coherent answers, which make you realize that the gobbledygook is just gobbledygook. That it's purposely done. That
Yeah,
if he's able to coherently project across something that's accurate, then why can't he do it over here as well? Just starts talking about powdered up babies all of a sudden. And it suits a narrative that then is like it's like a drug. It's like an heroin in the arm of oh yes, I'm proved right again by the people who are watching, the audience who are
yeah,
watching. And most of the indie media are completely and utterly, they will go quiet when they need to be loud. It's and they will if you're not speaking their line they will avoid you at all costs because you're not going to bring any money because that's the same
yeah.
incentive that the mainstream media. And I understand it because I got zero money. So I'm like, I'm trying to be independent. And the truth is that most of the independent media have got either deals with somebody at the back. So they got a little deal over here with a Kennedy organization or a deal over here with a Teal organization or a deal and it's all sickening. It's all very
Sure,
sickening because then they speak the
absolutely.
lines and everybody they get to advertise, so everybody goes to them, of course. And for people who are actually trying to get some truth out, the alternative media is a shit show. It's a terrible place to hang out at the moment. Um,
Yeah, it's
how
tough.
how uh, how much? I don't want to. I don't necessarily want to word it like this, but it's in my mind, so I may as well. How much of the independent media do you think are swayed financially by people like Kennedy?
Oh man, I don't. It seems like most of what I see now, especially in the West, right? The A lot of the people who are supposedly anti-imperialist, they all jumped on the Kennedy bandwagon very quickly. Um, but I try to find news sources that are outside of our little bubble, and look at international geopolitics. Then you don't hear so much about Kennedy. Our national politics are just they're just shot. Yeah, I think most of it, and you talk about like the thing is, it's very hard, right, to make a living, even if you want to tell the truth. Um, but you have to balance that with being able to get a platform, get an audience, network with people, and I think a lot of these people do ride the line in order to make a live, not only make a living, but do what little good they think they can do. And it's very hard to be altruistic and say, I'm just doing this for the truth and no money, right? People like us, we kind of have to
Mm.
like have some form of,
I get
way
I get
everyone has to make a
people
living.
I get people who literally I mean so I can't make a living on this. I'm trying my hardest to find a way to do it, and remain independent. And I got people who are like, "Oh, look, he's asking for money," and it's just like, "Oh God, well, what do you do when you like do something and people want it and the people pay for that thing? That's how it works." And
That's
I
how,
think
yeah,
a lot of it is like there's a lot of hypocrisy there to keep people all over in one place, all in these big platforms, which I started to call and coin the neo-mainstream media, because they're the ones who are just and if you actually look at who it is, like, say, I mean, people know I'm not a big Aaron Mate fan. So some people who listen to me can be like, oh, Aaron Mate. Aaron Mate's first entrance onto the scene was an interview with Noam Chomsky that was in a documentary which seems contrived, about what a situation that seems contrived. And his father is also kind of that sort of like under establishment
yeah,
commentator who tries to give the other point of view to a
yes.
situation and flip-flops on the big subjects. Oh, Aaron Mate's for the vaccines, pro-vaccine, pro-vaccine. Everybody's against them, anti-vaccine. But it's too late now because all the vaccines have been rolled out. So you've done your job, got everybody booked in the arm and etc. And then you go against it. I mean, that sort of thing. It
Well,
it
who is the
riles me up.
Democracy Now, right? Who is the one? Amy Goodman. She was one of the first ones that I noticed. She is massively funded by, again, it comes back to my personal politics of Peter Buffett. He's the Novo Foundation, which is all funded through Warren Buffett's, financial empire. So they're sort of this controlled opposition. And that was my first documentary was Will the Revolution Be Funded? Because I started to notice these contradictions of all these people who are leftists and fighting the power and this and that, but they're all taking in money from the supposed billionaires who they're standing against. So I say, well, here's the contradiction is like, how are you going to overcome these people while being funded by them? Is that even possible? And that was the first question I asked. I think it's not the wrong question, but it's not the final question for me. But it was the first one that really got me thinking is like, how do people resolve this contradiction? And I think that's what you're talking about right now with this. How can you really be anti-establishment? How can you be speaking truth to power and giving people an opinion that is outside of what the man wants, right? If you're funded by him, if you're funded by the powers that be, what incentive do you have to tell the truth? Are all these people courageously just taking money from the rich and then just valiantly like saying the things that will undo their empire? I don't think that's how it quite works. If anything, what they're doing is there's probably way more controlled opposition. And then the little bit of truth that does sneak through either gets silenced in a way that they can't. So I see all these people who say, oh, I'm getting banned, I'm getting demonetized, this and that. Okay, well, I've never even gotten big enough to say that in the first place. So like
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
there's a certain amount of strangling things in the cradle before they can even get that big. And then once you get like so Russell Brand, right? When that whole thing happened where he got censored, I was like, Russell Brand is like one of the most obvious controlled oppositions out there.
Mhm.
You, if anything, this is a giant publicity stunt to add to his supposed credibility with the public is that he's getting censored. You can't listen.
Yeah. Uh,
They don't want you to know what he has to say. And then all of a
and
sudden he becomes a trusted source.
Yeah, and to get people to lean across and move over to this one space rumble, which is are really run by a load of people who have got so many intelligence links that they're just going to be scraping up all of your data and keeping you in a cell. And basically, that's Rumble. I mean, if you just set up an account, you don't really get seen out there unless you've got a Rumble exclusive contract, like Kim Iverson or Russell Brand. And I said out loud to Kim, me and Kim Iverson's had a few backwards and forwards because I'm not too big fan of funding from the enemy. I listen, if I was Luke Skywalker and the Emperor Palpatine is giving me a load of money to do me Jedi business, I would have to say that I might be working for the dark side. Because I you can ask Anakin Skywalker about that. I think he'll tell you that you can't take money from Palpatine and not be killing kids in the bloody whatever tower that is, the Tower of Training Jedis. These people do align with it only takes, we talk about NGOs, it only takes a conduit of a new platform. It's Peter Thiel who's funding the platform, and he's going to be your new overlord, your cyber overlord, eventually selling you off to all intelligence services. But at least it's called Rumble, and now you work for Rumble. I don't work for Peter Thiel. I work for Rumble. They don't tell me what to do, but they put you in a cage, and they put you in your own cage with and they I think the idea of the echo chamber, when they were shouting that out in the noughties, oh, you're all in an echo chamber, you're all in an echo chamber all of the time. What they were doing was saying, we're going to create a load of echo chambers. We've seen this. That's what they always do. When they accuse us of stuff, then they create the things they accuse us of doing so that they could capture us in these spaces. So I think they Rumble, places like these sort of funding alternatives are often just to drive people all into one little group, where then if you look at Russell Brand and Kim Iverson and all these other things, they'll have their bonus RFK videos all around the same time, and then they'll all be talking about roughly the same thing all around the same time, and it becomes an overarching narrative that's just constantly, it's like coherent, it's in tune. Everybody and I Russell Brand has got serious problems from the past. Serious problems, and they are significant issues. If you ever want to create someone who could be brought down easily, then you create Russell Brand to be the guy who everybody follows because they're like, oh, suddenly he's got moral and ethics. Yeah, he's got moral and ethics, and he's off the junk, and he'll try and sell you Yuval Noah Harari over and over again. It's bizarre. The same people who rail against Yuval Noah Harari will sup up whatever Russell Brand says because he's repeating lines and then making you listen to Matt Taibbi and other people. So I completely echo those. What hope have we got then? What hope is it? Because I'd like to think that so we exist on the independent media, on the real alternative media. What hope have we got? How much? Because I don't, we both obviously get limited.
I think the only hope, and I was at this point where I was kind of hopeless a few years ago, but then I learned about what is happening in the rest of the world. And that's why I'm such a fan of what Russia and China are doing, because they're creating a different alternative to what our failing alternative. I'm so happy that there are places in the world that are saying that are, because in our bubble here, we think that we're the whole world. We're told from the beginning we're the best. We dictate what happens to the rest of the world, and that's changing. And it's a weird thing that that's changing in our lifetimes, but it's a good thing. And sure, where power is concentrated, things can go wrong. I'm not saying that they're perfect angels, but they're creating an alternative where there's an off-ramp for what the destructive path that we're going down. And it's gonna suck, but we're gonna persevere. And it's what we're talking about now with these influencers and these alternative media. What they do is they offer people It is like a drug for a way for people to stop thinking. Oh, I don't, this is going to be a hard time for people. I don't want to think about it. So I'm just going to subscribe to all my favorite people who talk about what all the problems and then leave me feeling worse than before, but I'm addicted to that feeling and I just like knowing. What we really need is to start using our minds again. Our minds have been put in a state of atrophy since our parents' generation. And it's time to start using our minds again. And what people like us and the real alternative, that's what we need to cultivate is not to just say, oh, I know this, that, and the other, and just follow me if you want to know the truth. No, we need to be able to understand how we can cultivate the truth, how we have access to the truth in our own knowledge, and that we don't have to just follow around the best leader who says, I'll tell you what's true. I'll tell you what's true. No, you can figure out for yourself what is true. That consuming media can become an addictive drug, and that you need to not just consume media, but you need to start thinking on your own. You need to do some research. You need to look into history. You need to become an active human being within the fabric of your lifetime, because your lifetime, everything that happened before you led up to your life now, and everything that happens after you're gone will be because of the actions or inactions you're taking now. So, in order to do actions that are actually going to be effective in the right direction and not just be a useful puppet for the CIA and all these nefarious people who want to take people who are ready to snap into action and reroute them in a destructive mode, you have to learn, okay, well, how does the system operate? And I think the cheat code for me is saying, well, we need to rebuild our economy. We need industry. We need to fight this degrowth monster. To move in the right direction, we need to start building an economy again where we're growing, we're increasing our energy inputs. They're all saying we need to reduce our footprint, we need to use less energy, we need to do more with less. No, more is good. We need to build more, we need to produce more. So that's a good guidepost, I think, for navigating what is a good direction to go in. Human beings need more energy, we need more food, we need more everything, right? And we need to
Mm-hmm.
build relationships with other countries based off of mutual cooperation, based off of trade, based off of win-win cooperation, these ideas of, okay, if we're trade partners and I'm trading my rice for your sugar or whatever, we have no incentive to blow each other up. You know,
Mm-hmm.
we have a phrase called love thy neighbor. Well, it's not just your neighbor right next door or the next state over or the next, whatever town over. It's the international community, because once we become a brotherhood of mankind, then we can go to space and we can create cooperative space exploration and go to the next frontier for human beings, and expand beyond our limited planet.
So the
That's the only
difference
way out.
the difference between what, say, the globalists of the World Economic Forum want to create, they want to create one ring to rule them all,
Yeah.
approach, and this is much more multiple rings to rule them all. No, this is much more multipolar globalism. Would you say what you're describing?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's funny, right? The word globalism is one of those trigger words, and for good reason, because and it's two competing views, right? It's sort of a globalism versus internationalism, and one is the real thing and one is the fake thing. One is the thing that wants to sound like the real thing and have all the bells and whistles and dress itself up as the real thing, but it's not. And that's why we have this rejection of this, globalist Borg. I actually remember listening to an interview with you a long time ago where you said something about, like, you don't want to be absorbed into this. You want to maintain, like, your culture and your, the essence of what it means to be a person from where you are. And that doesn't mean that, oh, I'm superior and we need Lebensstrom to, like, increase my one thing. No, it means that every culture, every nationality is respected and operating in a sovereign way. And then we come together as an international community. right? It's
Mm.
like the United States, where all the states have their own sovereignty, but then we come together as a nation for the greater good.
Mhm.
And I think that these ideas can replicate themselves down to the micro and up to the macro, that we want to all be sovereign nations that come together, that respect our local cultures and identities,
Mhm.
but also see humanity as a one brotherhood that can operate better together.
I can echo those words. I want to see um, every single sort of local tribal culture flourish in the UK, and at the moment they're being homogenized. When you were talking earlier about, you know, this is what they want to do. They want to create us all into one big gray color, which is
Yeah.
manageable, and it's kind of like the drab endings of the Soviet era too, because they had all when you were in your lecture the other day, you were saying, you know, you're a graphic designer, and some of the graphic design is amazing during the Soviet era, and it's just astounding. They really got their, you know, they make me want to inspire for the future, you know, etc. So they were very good uh, at pushing that, but we don't have that vision anymore. That kind of like died away in the later days of the Soviet Union, and instead they were all grey, and that made it really easy for these vibrant NGO-backed youngsters to come in and cause trouble and strife. And these people were like, "Oh, suddenly I'm altered." So it's trying to find a way that everything stays vibrant all of the time, so it can't be captured, I suppose, is one of the things. But that has to be about local tribal cultures, and that's always been dominated by houses and institutions. So trying to understand how micro, macro, how all of it will develop into one big group that works together in unity is really hard. Especially, I mean, I was talking to someone off the record, having a chat with a supporter the other day, and they were talking about how they'd like to build a bit of a commune, to talk about communes, and said he wanted to have like 12 people live together, and I was like, have you ever tried having 12 people live together? He's a nice guy. Yeah, you know, it's. I lived in a house once with about 12 people living in the house, and it was crowded. It was let by this Iranian. He was a terrible fraudster. He was Yazi K. Hanahan. Oh, what a terrible man! I will say his name out loud. What a terrible man he is, and he's still doing the same trade now. He's still ripping people off, and they're terrible, terrible folks. But have you ever tried to live within like a community of people? And that's how the international community often is, you know, very abrasive with each other on
Mm,
purpose, and always showing off how macho they are. And I like to think that the advances in technology and you know, it's so sad that it's coined, the phrase is coined mutually assured destruction, but that sort of like standard of realizing that you could be outed very easy by the other side, and it would just lead to a bloodbath, so everybody doesn't do it, is a way that keeps a like modicum of stability. But at the end of the day, we've really got to reach further than that. We've really got to
yeah.
be friendly with each other, and it's all of the what I think you could all only describe them as bastards of and the political systems which are bastardized, like royal systems that have been enforced upon us, really, and dressed up as democracy and things like this. None of this is beneficial to us. It all leads us to the cages that we talk about,
Yeah.
and how to have that vibrance, how to have that positivity. How can you tell me, Fox, please?
How can we have that? Right. So we don't want just centralization, all centralization that's drab and gray and, but there are benefits to centralization, like a centralized power grid that everyone benefits from, right? We don't want total decentralization where everyone is in tribes and we live in huts again. And but we still want people to have like rich local tapestries of community and culture and things like that. And that differentiation adds to the vibrancy and the interest of life. So yeah, it's about balancing these entities of centralization and decentralization, but the element that always has to be there in any endeavor, in any human endeavor, has to have a conception of humanity that is positive, that is future looking, that does not see human beings as critters on the planet that are destroying it, that are eating too much and are becoming overpopulated. And we can't let that oligarch hereditary aristocracy mindset infect our thinking. And I think we naturally don't think that way. We're all like human being. Most of us, we're just good. We're good. And we're born with this goodness. And it's only when this mind virus infects our brains that we start to doubt what we know is good and right deep in our hearts. And I think that's the beauty of humanity, and that's why I don't lose faith even in these really dark times that we're going through. Is it because I know that about myself, and I know that when I talk to other people, you say you love to talk to other people. I do too, because I see it in other people, and all these like superficial differences melt away, and we know that we can actually achieve this, but it is hard. Is hard to shake that mind virus. Absolutely.
I've loved having this conversation. I hope we get to have loads of conversations again.
Same
Um,
here.
can you tell people again the best places to find you and support your work?
Yeah, please go to my website, spacecommune.com. We have a Substack as well. We have YouTube, podcasts, all the multimedia. Just look for Space Commune.
Awesome. Excellent. Well, thanks for joining me, man. Really, really hope we'll do this again and again.
Yeah, same here. Yeah, that's great.
What we know is that we will end up with many more unemployed